Welcome, everyone, to Storytelling for Change. I am Larisha Collins, the Marketing and Business Development Manager here at Change Consulting, and we are super excited to have you all join us for our first of many webinars. We are thrilled again that each of you decided to join us. This first celebration or first webinar that we're doing is a celebration rather for the launch of our most recent ebook, Storytelling for Social Change: How to Use Stories to Seed Narratives, Shape Worldviews, and Win Justice. About Change Consulting. Change Consulting is a Black woman-owned social change communications agency. For over 17 years, we have supported change makers and racial justice leaders in driving transformational systems change. We have an integrated suite of services from strategy over to media, digital, creative, and training that strengthens clients with solutions that reflect their missions. And to tell you a little bit about the team that you'll be hearing from today, we have Kay Kwanko. She is the Vice President of Strategy. And of course, our founder and CEO, Bill and Mesvin Packwood. Those two beautiful ladies will be the presenters for today. And I, again, Larisha Collins, will be assisting in this webinar as we go forth. So want to remind you that when you registered for the webinar, you should have received a link to the ebook. If not, that is okay, no worries. You can check the chat and it'll be dropped there. But want to again remind you about our services. As I mentioned before, we are a full communications agency. We plan, we act, we train. Overall, we get it and we get it done for you. And so if you would love to reach out to us to learn more about our services, to learn more about how we might be able to assist you, please make sure you head over to our website. It's right there on the screen for you, changelse.com. You can always shoot us an email to inquire about our services and how we may be of an assistance or some assistance to you. So please make sure you reach out to us. We would love to hear from you. The information is there on the screen, and it'll also be dropped in the chat as well. So thank you again for being here. We are excited to get things rocking and rolling. And now I will pass it over to the two women of the hour, Miss Kay and Billin.
Thank you so much, Larisha. That was great. And as Larisha mentioned, we've been around about 17 years, and yet this is the first webinar we're doing of its kind. Typically, when we do trainings or information sessions, they tend to be very focused on clients. And we also tend to like to work behind the scenes, but this is a new practice we are starting here at Change, where we want to share what we know and what we've learned in a way that's client agnostic. So thank y'all so much for joining us for this particular webinar to kick off that effort. And I'm also excited to see so many familiar faces from former alums at Change, clients, collaborators, friends. So thank y'all so much for spending time with us when you could be doing something else. We really appreciate that. I want to start by talking a little bit about, why stories. Maybe some of you all are wondering, why focus on stories right now? We're in a moment where everything feels and is so urgent. People are struggling to put food on the table, literally. Civil rights are being eroded. Our immigrant families, our friends, our neighbors are being attacked. And so with challenges like this, it might feel indulgent or even irrelevant to talk about storytelling. But that's really why stories do matter. And we'll unpack that a lot more in this webinar. So just to talk about 3 reasons why I think stories are so important right now. We are really navigating these multiple crises while living in a world drowning in content and scrolls and feeds and headlines and noise. There's research that shows that the average human attention span in 2025 is about 8 to 8.25 seconds. That is actually shorter than the widely cited attention span of a goldfish, which is 9 seconds. And so this decline has been going on since the early 2000s because of just the rise of tech, of social media, and just the overwhelming competition there is for attention right now. So simply put, people are overwhelmed. And I know a lot of us are as well. We're drowning in content. And a lot of what we hear, what we see, what we read is just not sticking. And so stories are what cut through all of that. They make what's abstract feel very personal. They spark emotion, they help people care, and there's tons of research that demonstrates that. In their book, Made to Stick, Chip and Dan Heath talk a lot about how stories are one of the most important ways that we can make ideas stick. Meaning that if we want our causes, our ideas, our campaigns to be really remembered, understood, and having a lasting impact, then we need to make sure to prioritize stories. So a well-told story can really hold attention in a world that's filled with distraction. It can make someone stop scrolling. It can make us listen longer and remember. And perhaps most importantly in these times, stories really also remind us of our shared humanity. They let people see the world through someone else's eyes. They bridge divides that fact alone just can't. And so the right story has the power to challenge our deeply ingrained biases. It can help us dismantle stereotypes. And it could also just capture collective attention and inspire collective action. So when we talk about the power of story, we're really not stepping away from the hard realities of this moment. We're giving ourselves a way to reach people's hearts, to change their minds, and to move them to act. And I'm going to pass it to my colleague Kay, who's going to go deeper into the science behind stories.
So we know that stories are all around us. And in fact, our human brains are wired for stories. From a young age, we make sense of the world through stories. And as we grow, stories continue to shape our emotions, they motivate our actions, and they teach us valuable life lessons. So here there's an image that shows how stories really tap into two sides of the brain. Our left side handles logic, analysis, facts, figures. Meanwhile, our emotions and values are oriented on our right side of the brain. And so storytelling plays a vital role in bridging this logic and emotion divide. Stories make information more compelling and memorable, as Billin mentioned, by really wrapping facts in a narrative that taps into our emotions. Stories unlock our emotions in the ways that emotions drive human behavior. We know from scientific research that stories help stimulate neurological centers of the brain that help us feel more care and concern for other people's feelings and experiences. We can use stories to move people from a place of fear to a place of hope, from apathy and self doubt to the feeling that we can make a difference, from inertia to urgency, and from isolation to solidarity. And lastly, stories spur faster understanding and action. At the same time that stories trigger our emotions, they also help us get the gist of an idea quickly. When we hear powerful stories instead of only data or statistics, our brain releases chemicals like dopamine that help us remember what we hear. Stories allow us to see the ways that our lives are similar to each other's. They encourage us to work together. And hearing a character-driven story releases oxytocin, which has been shown to move us toward cooperation. And so these are just some of the ways that brain science shows us that storytelling is worth investing more time and effort so we can change hearts and minds and win the transformation that we seek.
Thanks so much, Kay. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about how stories can really help shape worldview, especially as we think about how we embed frames and narratives into them. We're also going to be talking about the types of stories you can tell, as well as how to build a storytelling culture as well during this webinar. But first, I want to talk a little bit about, how stories really help us understand the world and our place in it. This is something beyond the science. The science and the research are good, but I think storytelling is something we also all understand intrinsically, inherently. We dream in stories at night. And so this is beyond science. This is really our reality and the way we understand the world. We've used stories to pass down our values, our traditions, our ideas throughout history. This is something that every culture does. No one culture owns the idea of stories, right, and storytelling. So whether it's a myth, a parable, or a community story told around the kitchen table, these stories shape our sense of identity and collective imagination. And that's why when we talk about changing culture, we're also really talking about changing stories. And if we want to dream and scheme for lasting, impactful change at the level of belief, of narrative, of what people think is possible, then we have to look at the stories we're telling and how we're telling them. I want to unpack three concepts that work together to really shape our worldview, and that is storytelling, framing, and narrative. These three concepts work together to influence our interpretation of information and ultimately our beliefs and our actions. When telling stories, what we're really doing is sharing a sequence of events with characters, a setting, and a sense of cause and effect. That's what pulls people in. makes them care, leaves them changed by the end. And, we do this every day with our friends, in our workplaces, in our communities. We're all storytellers at heart, right? And so we want to bring that practice that we do so well every day into our work, into our causes, and prioritize that beyond jargon, beyond stats, and make that kind of the core of our communications practice. Next, I want to talk about framing, which is a core part of story, whether or not we think about it that way. Framing is really what decides which part of the story we highlight and how we want people to interpret the stories we're telling. So two people can often tell the same story completely differently depending on the frame they're using. So if we think about a news story about a protest, for example, one outlet might frame it as a fight for justice, another might frame it as a threat to law and order. It could be the same event, the same situation, but a completely different frame based on who's telling the story. The battle of the story, that those of us in movement work think a lot about, is also really the battle of the frame. That's really where the concept of frame or reframed from George Lakoff comes in. And then there's narrative, which is the bigger picture, the meaning-making system that ties so many of our stories together. Narratives are really what helps us make sense of the world. And one of my favorite ways to think about it comes from Jeff Chang, who says that stories are stars, narratives are constellations, and the galaxy is culture. So in other words, each story we tell matters, but together our stories are creating patterns that shape culture, that shape narrative, and ultimately that shape beliefs and worldviews. So those of us working for racial and social justice have to learn how to connect our storytelling, our framing, and narrative change efforts to shape the world we want. And so we can unpack the narratives we're trying to dismantle and think about those we want to seed. I know there are folks from All Youth Are Sacred who are on this call. That's a campaign where we spent a lot of time thinking about the narratives we wanted to dismantle and the ones that we wanted to build. It's beautiful to see young people continue to drive that narrative change work forward. And then we also want to create engaging, compelling stories that connect emotionally with our audiences. And finally, we want to frame thoughtfully by presenting stories from a perspective that highlights the most important aspects. And we want to help our audiences interpret and help make meaning of the things that they're seeing through our work on framing.
So, as you think about stories that could drive more engagement, more action on the issues at the heart of your work, it's helpful to also consider the different ways a story can be structured. So, this next section, structuring stories, we want to show the ways that there are common elements of a story. And many stories share these common structural elements. If you think about your favorite stories, many of these are integrated throughout. So, the first being thematic threads that explore deeper and universal themes. These could be themes like family, safety, belonging, that resonate with audiences and give stories their emotional weight. Next, plot structure or a sequence of events in a story that often follow a pattern. This pattern can be seen as the rising action, followed by the climax, followed by falling action, and then resolution. This is a pattern that makes a story interesting, compelling, and resonant with your audience. And then lastly, character arcs, featuring strong and dynamic character development, focus on individuals that undergo transformation and growth. So as we listen to stories and dissect these different elements, we can connect with the struggle of the characters, celebrate their victories, and learn from their journeys. On the next slide, we want to show an example of how a story arc can be structured. That's the public narrative framework by Marshall Gans, a researcher and lecturer on organizing and leadership. And the public narrative framework here can be broken down between challenge, choice, and outcome. This is a framework we like to use in storytelling trainings to help people understand their personal story. And we'll talk about types of organizational stories next, but this framework can especially be helpful in thinking about origin stories. So how did your organization, coalition, or initiative get started? How did you as an individual get started as an organizer and grow your leadership? It's important to think about challenge, choice, outcome as an arc. So starting with challenge, you want to name the challenge and why it's so difficult. Some questions to ask are, what was your challenge? What was so challenging about it? Or why is the work you do important to you personally? Next, choice, explaining the choice and why you made it and how it made you feel. Some questions to ask are, why did you make the choice you did? Why did you get the courage? Where did you get the courage or hope? And how did you feel? And lastly, outcome, sharing the outcome of the choice and lessons learned. Questions to ask could be, how did the outcome feel? Why did it feel that way? And what did it teach you? So answering all these questions and formulating stories through this kind of arc sets up an arc that brings others along your journey with you. Of course, not all stories fit neatly into a three-part structure in this way or have a necessarily happy endings, but a compelling story should show the complexity of people's character, the range of emotions they experience, the scope of their ambitions, and the richness of their relationships. Thinking about story structure can help us more effectively illustrate the power of our work by sharing our own personal journeys and lived experiences. And when the plots of our stories connect to the roots of injustice, such as wealth, income disparities, structural racism, history of community disinvestment, we set up these systemic problems as threats to our values and then can craft a plot that shows how the problems play out in real life and why our work is needed.
All right. And there's a lot more that can be said about storytelling structures, and the ebook actually has an expanded section on that. We're also thinking a lot about non-Western storytelling structures, which we did not include in the ebook, but probably will do a follow-up blog post about, because there are, again, all kinds of different ways to tell stories and to structure our stories that we can learn from the cultures we're from as well. All right, so I want to talk a little bit about the nitty gritty now that we've gotten through some theory about the types of organizational stories that you can tell to move people into action. I think of a lot of our work as, we're also learners. We're learning from other people in the field. And one of the folks we learn from is Andy Goodman, who's a leader in nonprofit storytelling, who says that good stories are always people stories. And every organization should have kind of a bundle of story types, and which each one that serves a purpose, how we began, why we exist, the impact we've made, and where we're going. A lot of times we rely on only one kind of story. It could be how we succeeded, but there's so much richness in the stories in between, in our campaigns and our movements and our work. And so these are the stories that bring audiences along with us. It helps them imagine possibilities and connects our work to their own lives. So I'm going to talk about 6 different types of stories and also give some examples. The first 3 are kind of foundational. I think they ground people in who you are and what you stand for. And the first is the origin story. It's how your organization, your coalition, or your movement began. It kind of fixes the story in a moment in time. Maybe it's a founder's spark of passion, or maybe oftentimes, especially with nonprofits led by folks of color, it's us directly impacting the crisis that we're trying to fight against. That mobilizes us to start the effort or the organization or the cause, right? And so we want to show the why behind our effort and build a bridge to our deeper purpose through origin stories. Another type of story is the nature of our challenge story. This is really our chance to clearly define the challenge or injustice we're working to address. So this is not a data or statistic story. It's really a human story. It's best told in the stories of humans, and we'll share some examples of that. And it's best told in the stories of the people who are living out the challenge every day in our lives, right? And so it helps us illustrate what's at stake, what shared values are being threatened, and helps our audiences understand the so what of our mission. And then impact stories, these ones we may be more familiar with, but these are our wins, right? They also show our approach to how we got to the wins. I think it's really important when we tell our impact stories that we also share the barriers, the turning points, the people behind the change, so that it can make our impact felt and not just reported. All right, all stories are about people for sure. And then there's specifically the people and performance stories. And these are the stories that bring your mission to life by highlighting the individuals, the staff, the volunteers, the partners, the community members, the constituents that embody your work and your values. We know today people really connect with people, not just to institutions or organizations. So these stories help build empathy and belonging, and they help people connect with our work in a deeper way. And then there are lessons learned stories, which really demonstrate growth and honesty. Every organization, effort, or campaign, we all experience lots of setbacks in our work and sometimes outright failures. And so we want to tell these stories with humility that can humanize our leadership, that can humanize our work, and show that we're committed to learning and to improvement and not shy away from talking about the struggle in the work as well. And then finally, I think we need a lot more of these stories. And these are future vision stories. These are really about possibility. These are about painting a picture of what the world looks like when we are successful. So we want to help audiences imagine the world in the future. Maybe it's 5 years, 10 years, 25 years from now, if we succeed in the work. And so that we want to paint that picture so vividly that people can see themselves in it. And for sure, these types of stories are some that we need a lot more of these days as well. I want to share some examples of these because I know these can all feel very abstract. And of course, this is a storytelling webinar, so I want to also share some stories. The first one is the Deliver Birth Justice campaign, which is a campaign we got a chance to work on a couple of years back. And it's a campaign by 5 Bay Area counties focused on the issue of Black maternal health. And so in the Bay Area, Black babies are 2 or 3 times more likely to be born too early or too small or not at all. And so although Black moms and babies and families deserve to be healthy and safe and supported, racism harms Black folks' ability to have safe and healthy pregnancies, births, families' lives. And so this campaign brought together a lot of folks to mobilize all corners of the Bay Area, from health professionals to policymakers to community members, to end racism and birth justice for Black families. And beyond the stats, what we really wanted to do was ground this campaign in the stories of real Black moms from the Bay Area and put them at the heart of this campaign. And so we went and gathered all these stories and talked to these amazing moms. They were also very clear in focus groups that they did not want to have doom and gloom stories. They knew the problems, they lived them, but that's not what they wanted their stories to be about. They wanted their stories to be about resilience, about power, about solutions. And so they shared their stories with us through the written word, through video, and through photos as well. And it's really these stories that helped us land this campaign in the front page of the SF Chronicle, which was kind of our bigger goal in terms of media coverage for this campaign. This is also another example of people's story, but it's different in that it grounds the people and performance story and what is actually needed when it comes to talking about violence in our communities. So this is a media coverage we got for one of our former clients, Urban Peace Movement. This is a story about Brianna Manning, who is the Community Healing Program Coordinator at Urban Peace Movement. And Urban Peace Movement supports young people who are being disproportionately impacted by violence and mass incarceration. And they're really pushing for more investments in the things we know stop violence, right? Not more punishment, but more healing. And so we wanted to kind of tell a story of a person who's on the front lines of violence prevention and violence reduction, but whose stories often don't get told. When we think about violence, we think about the folks being impacted by violence. We think about, police primarily as the solution to violence. And we don't often think about the peacemakers, the violence interrupters, these folks who are really on the front lines of reducing violence every day in a way that puts young people on a path to more opportunity rather than punishment. And so our hope is that by telling more of these types of stories, we can fuel more investment in these solutions, not more police and not more punishment. And so for sure, this is something that I think needs to happen on a much bigger scale when we think about the work of violence, ending mass incarceration as well. And then I also wanted to share this example of a storytelling campaign that was really important, but also really fun, that our digital and content team, I believe Nasima is on this call too, helped to spearhead. And this is for Akanadi Foundation, a We Love Oakland campaign to counter negative narratives about Oakland, which was happening last year, to really take political power away from the people of Oakland. There was a really concerted effort to drive a very concerted and negative narrative about Oakland. And so Akanadi Foundation wanted to do its part to counter that by lifting up stories and voices of people who live here. So this was a beautiful campaign of featured videos of Oakland luminaries, chefs, movement advocates, et cetera, who shared what makes Oakland so special and why so many of us live here. And so it also included a letter writing campaign from folks who wrote love letters to Oakland. And so although it anchored the campaign campaign with some stories already built in, it also invited other folks to share their stories of Oakland as well. And this has gone on to win several awards, such as the Telly Awards, because it is, I think, so beautiful and evocative. So I hope these examples bring to life the types of stories we can tell across issues and how we can make an impact through our channels, through earned media, etc. as well. Back to you, Kay.
Thank you, Bill. I love all those examples. So we've gone through the why, the what, and we want to close here with the how. How do we build a culture of storytelling, and how can you implement more storytelling practice and strategy at your organization? We believe that by using practical tools and existing touch points, actually, organizations can embrace storytelling as a core part of their identity and operations and foster a culture that values and nurtures storytelling by lifting up stories and voices that need and deserve to be heard. And so on this slide, we have some recommendations for you for building a culture of storytelling. The first is identify the types of stories and messengers you need to meet your communications goals and move your audiences. So asking yourself, what does success look like? Who do you need on your side to do that? What do these stakeholders value? Who do they listen to? And what channels do they use to get their information? Also, whose voices are shared or left behind? Based on these answers, you can identify the types of stories you need to lift up using the types of stories we just outlined, who those storytellers should be, and which channels to use to reach your core audiences. Second, building the habit of capturing stories. So we know that storytelling is really a muscle that needs to be developed across an organization. Whenever you hear a good story, we encourage you to write it down, type it into your phone, or leave yourself a voicemail, because they really are all around us. And as part of your organizational practice, you can use existing touch points to collect stories. So asking staff or volunteers to lift up good stories during meetings, sourcing stories through social media posts from your community, or asking for stories and event follow-ups, emails, or phone calls. Third, implement a story gathering process that works for you. So you can start by identifying who will manage the storytelling process on your team and create a method that makes it easy to capture and track. This can be as simple as an Excel sheet that identifies the types of stories you're after, the people who can help identify and develop those stories, and who will connect you to those people. Using this system can help track outreach, follow-ups, the context about the storyteller, as well as interviews. You can then create a dedicated story bank as an active database to organize your stories you've collected. And so you're more prepared to incorporate them when you need them, for example, at events, in outreach to the press or fundraising appeals, or when launching a campaign. Fourth, use an ethical storytelling process to collect and share stories. So at Change, we like to follow Immigrant Rising Storytellers' Bill of Rights and Resonance's ethical storytelling model to make sure we're telling stories in a way that empowers the storyteller and their voice. You'll always want to adjust your questions according to the person you're speaking with and capture what's unique about them and their experiences. But most importantly, be prepared to meet storytellers where they are at emotionally and physically. So be upfront about how you plan to use the story. Be clear that they are the owners of their story with the power to change it or to ask you to not use it. Ensure that the storyteller signs a story release form, acknowledging and agreeing to how their story will be used, and giving you permission to share that story across a variety of channels. We also recommend compensating storytellers for their time, keeping them updated about where you are in the process of sharing their story every time it's used. Fifth, strategically disseminate your story. So another tool you can use is an editorial calendar. This can help you map out the stories you want to share and when, what channels you will use based on your audiences and goals. You can then notify your storytellers when their stories are used, encouraging them to amplify the story through their own channels. And so a recommendation is also to develop a toolkit. So developing shared content, sample social media posts, email language and visuals so that your storytellers, key partners, messengers, and allies can help amplify those stories. And lastly, be sure to follow up and evaluate your efforts. So reach back out to the storytellers, thank them for their time and ensuring they receive compensation. You also want to evaluate the types of stories you collected. Maybe there's some types of stories that you haven't tried yet that can really complement your campaign or events, thinking about the mediums that are used and whether they're actually reaching your intended target audiences and furthering your goals. And then internally evaluate your process and continue to refine the ways that you build a storytelling culture. So we hope these recommendations help you in incorporating storytelling in your organization. And I'll pass it back to Larisha.
Awesome. Well, again, thank you, Villain. Thank you, Kay, for all of your valuable information during this webinar. Round of applause where you are to the attendees and to our panelists. We greatly appreciate your insight. Again, if you want to learn more about Change Consulting, about the services that we offer, which also includes all of this information, please make sure you reach out to us on our website. You'll see it right there on your screen, or drop us an email at hello@change-llc.com. For those who registered, again, you should have received a link to download the ebook. It was also dropped in our chat as well. So if you don't see it in the chat right now, just go back and check your confirmation registration email, and you'll see the link to download the ebook there. And also make sure you stay tuned for a few things that we have coming up, and also news about our next webinar. Don't forget to follow us on social media, on LinkedIn, on Instagram, Facebook, all Change Consulting. Thank you again for joining us. And we hope that you learned something, took something away, and just had a great time with us this afternoon and this evening if you're on the East Coast. Thank you and have a great night, great day.